All right, we are live here. It is day 15 of the 15 Days of Festival that went virtual this summer. Thank you all very much for joining us. We have Seth Bloom and Christina Gelsone here with Acrobufos, the artists behind Airplay, which I'm so excited for you all to see next summer. But in the meantime, Seth and Christina were so gracious and generous of their time and talent to produce the glimpse inside of the creation and kind of some of the stories behind their show Airplay. But I want to tell everybody watching just a little bit more about Seth and Christina. So you guys met while you were in Afghanistan, both working in kind of separate capacities, eventually coming together to start creating your first show together. But I love the short bio on your website too, because it says became engaged when you were performing in Scotland, married in China, and then you occasionally go home to New York. So
this is the longest we've been home in 4 years.
Wow.
The last 100 days.
That must be really difficult, because I know that, part of, I'm sure the reasoning for practicing, silent comedy is that you can truly travel everywhere. And that must be something that you guys are both very, very passionate about. So what's that been like? Just kind of stationary?
Well, I can now keep plants alive for the first time.
And we have a lot of like home back burner projects that we finally cleared all the way out. It took them until about last week to get all those projects done.
And we're now working on a new show.
So.
Oh, well, I'm sure that you just answered a couple questions that we were planning on getting. So we're excited to ask you more about that. But so everyone that's watching, please feel free to enter your questions for Seth and Christina in the comments section. And while we wait on those to come in, I've got a couple questions of myself to ask of you guys. So something that was really striking to me when you were talking about previous shows that you had worked on, the Cafe Goma, that Seth, you had created the masks for that. How frequently do you guys create the pieces or the costumes that you work with?
As artists, most of the shows we've done, we've made almost everything except for the costumes. Both Christina and I come out of a tradition of masked theater. There was a school in California called the Del Arte School of Physical Theater, and you did a lot of work with masks there. And then a follow-up school I went to in London called the Lecoq School, worked a lot with masks, and you learn to make masks in both of those schools. And I just enjoyed as a sculptor working with clay and paper and mucking about. So that's how that first show with the half masks we call Madame Monsieur. That was one of the first shows that we really started making, and because we love doing mask work together.
And that was cool because I love mask work because it's so difficult and it's unusual. And the half masks are super fast, like cartoons. You are extremely verbal and really big. But with the oversized mask, we call it oversized mask in Cafe Goma, that are like so much bigger than your own face. The tiniest movement makes a difference. And so as an actor, you really learn how to fine tune both the skill and the discipline of where you're pointing and also the rhythm that you're working in. So as a tool of performance, it's intensely difficult and pays off well.
And there's not in the US, there's not a lot of companies that do mask performing work, partially because the audiences aren't interested in it. Frankly. But in Europe and Southeast Asia, there's a huge tradition of doing different kind of mask shows. So we thought we would do Cafe Goma and find a market in the States for it, but no one was interested.
Yeah.
So
in Asia, we performed our mask shows more in Asia than we did in the States.
Yeah.
Really? So in that same vein, do you find that other shows are more, that sell more tickets, I guess, than others?
You mean
like if Cafe Goma
ask the question again in another way?
Sure. If Cafe Goma you say is more like audiences may be more interested in it than other parts of the world. Sure. What about some of your other shows? Like, do you find that Airplay is gets a larger audience in other countries, or
Airplay kind of hit the sweet spot in the world.
Yeah,
For some reason, we just hit everything worked really well. We do notice is that in the U.S. market, Airplay is definitely pitched more for a family audience, which we advertise everywhere. But when we go to Europe, we often do shows that are predominantly adults. There's much more kind of a forgiving nature for clowns in Europe, especially.
I don't think forgiving is the right word.
Loving nature?
No, they like clowns. Adults like clowns. They dress up. They wear really nice clothes. They have coffee and champagne, and you're performing for like the la-ti-da crowd.
Yeah, last 2 Christmases ago, we did a season in Austria, and people literally dressed up in fur coats and had cocktails before the show to come see Airplay. That doesn't happen in the States. Yeah,
we come to the States and they're like, oh, well, you're doing a morning show at 10 a.m. for the school kids. You know, like it's like a totally different reception. So the show is very popular all over the world, but the kind of audiences that we perform for change from country to country, or from continent to continent.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. I think about the culture of like Carnivale in Italy and the opulence that comes with, and I think that makes a lot of sense with having pre-show cocktails and really going all out to see Airplay. That sounds like a wonderful evening.
I mean, we're lucky because we get to perform in so many different environments and for so many different audiences, and it's a good challenge as a performer to say what of Airplay is going to work well in Austria, and how do we perform it there, and then what's going to work, say, down in Festival. We don't change the show, but we change the rhythm and how we play the show.
Yeah.
So
the first time you perform anywhere in the world is just like nerve-wracking because every place is different. Even performing like in New York City and then across the river in New Jersey, the audiences respond differently. So the first show is always like jumping into the deep end. You have no idea what the temperature of the water is going to be. It's a big
for a lot of your the comedy shows that you were doing, that's kind of street level, you can read the audience and maybe adapt as you go along, but Airplay has this set structure to it. So it's
light cues,
right?
I can't go wandering into the audience anytime I feel like it, because you have to light the audience.
So we've got some questions coming in. So you talked about the difficulty of flying kites in different theaters, depending on how hot the room is, how many people are in the audience, which those two things kind of play off of each other. What's the most challenging theater you've ever flown the kites in?
The New Victory Theater in New York City.
Really?
Is that the most difficult?
I'd say that's one of them.
What was another one? There was one where they always went sideways.
So the answer to why the New Victory Theater was challenging, it's the smallest theater we performed in. It's about 500 seats, and the audience doesn't go very far back. So the air that comes off the front of the blowers hits the back of the theater and kind of circles around. So we don't get an even column of air. So it makes it very turbulent to fly the kites. Plus, the heat from the audience, because it's a small space, affects the kites a lot more, and they start to twist.
And then also that building, because it's a classic New York City building from, I guess, the 1890s or something, there are hidden air vents. There are holes in the theater that no one knows where they are.
Oh, gosh.
And it's okay at like the matinee shows when the day is fairly set. But when night comes and all of the evening breezes off of the ocean start coming in, it's nightmare.
There are 2 other theaters I can think of. One was also Brighton Dome, which is a circular concert hall in the south of England. If you're a Pink Floyd fan, they got started there. So we were performing there a couple of Christmases ago, and we did the show mostly in the round, but there were a lot of air leaks. And the kites would blow one direction or the other direction, depending on which way the winds were blowing.
Because it had been built as a horse barn.
Right.
For King somebody.
Wow.
I think David Bowie got thrown out because he had a bunch of people rip up the seats and was never invited back. It was one of the coolest venues we've done. The other is a place, we played a place called Strathmore in Rockville, Maryland.
Oh my God.
And it's a beautiful concert hall. It looks like being inside a violin. It's 1,800 seats. It's made of wood, but concert halls have what they call a plenum, which is a bunch of air that sits underneath the audience and circulates to help keep the building moist. And those air currents made it almost impossible to fly kites.
That was the hardest.
That was the hardest.
In fact, the second time we performed there,
yeah, we did.
The audience grew, which means by the time we come back to Festival, the audience might grow because people come back to see this show. It's so interesting. And there were so many people in the audience, and it got so warm that I didn't even get to the corners of my kite. I never even got to the strings.
Wow.
It went out, and then
it's like there's a vacuum coming under the stage, and they would just like that. My gosh. Our stage manager's like, we can never go back there, but
we're definitely
going to go back there. They liked us a lot. So.
Well, good. And now it's a challenge, right?
Now it's a challenge. Yeah.
Yep. That's fascinating.
So for whoever asked that, look up what a plenum is. That's an interesting thing to follow because we knew nothing about plenums.
Yeah.
And a lot of theaters have them.
And then there is one other weird story about flying things and different audiences. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time we had an audience to watch the show in development. And I pushed the red balloon out over the audience. And I didn't realize that the heat of the audience changes the room. And we found out the hard way because the balloon went up and never came back down.
How do you come back from that? I'm not sure.
It was good that it was a rehearsal. I mean, it was like an open showing.
Yeah, it wasn't a performance.
We were developing work in front of a bunch of people.
They're like, that's what happens when you're learning how to do a show.
Yeah. So do you trust some of the stage crews that you've worked with to, if they're, saying, well, we could fly those kites, how hard can that be? Have you ever passed the reins off to one of them? Yeah. We
often hand them over because the crew is always interested because we do something different than most theater shows. Mm-hmm. They're always interested in the kind of stuff we're doing. They really like the fabrics that fly up in the air, and they'll be hanging around when we're flying stuff. And so I'll often hand that looks easy. I remember a guy in Australia who I handed it off to, who was sure he could do it, and then they would just collapse into the audience.
And you have to kind of love that a little bit, right?
Yeah. And they do too. That's the best. Like, oh, I'm so glad that's so much harder than it looks. They feel very vindicated somehow.
That's awesome. So you kind of answered this earlier, but when you were talking about workshopping what is now known as airplay, you would use cellophane as an option for the kites. And when Daniel came to see the show, that kind of modified it. So airplay as it is now is a set piece. There's nothing that you all are currently workshopping, or is there kind of a process even still that you're kind of tweaking things?
So there's two answers to that question. Can I start? Okay. The first answer to that question is that we come from a tradition of street performing where you work outside, and they say you don't know your show until you've done it 100 times. So in that 100 times, so many things can go wrong and you can figure out how to recover from them. So airplay was the same way in that we premiered the show in front of an audience, but in the first 100 shows, we could start to feel where people weren't laughing as much and write some jokes, or would have air column problems and be like, okay, how do we solve this in this kind of theater so that the next theater we would go to, we could figure that out. Mm-hmm. So the show solidified a lot in the first 100 times it went around and we performed in front of audiences. The second answer to that question is, yes, we're working on another show.
No, but also we keep working on ideas. So when we were in the Netherlands, sometimes we would be able to load in fast enough because the Dutch are amazing. That we could practice a new idea that we were playing with. So it's constantly cooking. There's always something on the back burner.
But in the theater parlance, is like airplay is mostly frozen, which means we don't write a lot of new scenes for it because it's working really well. We've done it almost 300 times, and it's working really well as a piece. So we don't like to mess with it too much. But so if we're going to spend our time on something, we're going to spend our time thinking about how to make another show.
Right. Okay. Well, I know that there are some questions about airplay, but we can loop back to those because while we're on the topic, I want to just kind of jump the gun here and ask about the new show.
You want to start?
Well, part of it is that a show always comes out differently in the end than you begin with. So anything we tell you may be totally redonkulously wrong.
We won't hold you to it.
But right now, yeah, we're working with the idea from traveling around the world. We've been here. I'm an avid bird watcher, and we've been hearing birds around the world. And Seth wants to touch on what's happening with birds and also what we as humans are doing to our environment. Because as we travel around the world, we see the environment changing. Sometimes very much in our face. We were in Australia during the fires.
Wow.
And we've also been through, there was one year where we were in like 5 natural disasters. We were in an earthquake in Alaska. We were in a
snowstorm in Seattle.
And then what was the one in the Midwest?
Bomb cyclone and tornadoes in the Midwest.
We were in a typhoon in Hong Kong. This is all the same year. This is all happening in the same year. I don't know how we survived that year.
Wow.
So often we are face to face with a changing reality, and everywhere we go around the world, people say the same thing, like things are changing. So
so that's the general overarching idea that we're starting. We know for sure that we want to do without words so we can work anywhere in the world. We know that what makes airplay in a lot of our shows really strong is our selection of kind of eclectic music choices. So we know that we want to use music again from around the world. But we work kind of in a silent clown poetic métier. And so we have to really go into a room and try to make stuff out of nothing. And if we can already see the end of the project, we don't want to make it. So the materials we're working with right now need to be small, but expand big like airplay, because we live in New York and don't have a lot of storage. So we don't have like a warehouse we can put 18 trucks of stuff in. So the materials we're working with are going to be similar to airplay. We want to work with thin pieces of plastic, painter's plastic, that people use to protect their houses because you can light them beautifully. So that'll be like the starting. And because we've seen plastic used ubiquitously across the world, covering farm fields in southern China, straws everywhere, we want to see that even though we know environmentally it's terrible, but there's a lot of beauty in it. So we want to use basically recyclable plastic as our props to start with, and then see where that leads us. But who knows?
It might end up being about frogs and using wood. Who knows?
Well, that sounds amazing, and I love the juxtaposition that you're talking about with the use of plastic. That sounds really, really fascinating. And I mean, even if it ends up looking completely different, I know we're all very excited to see what that looks like.
I think underlying any of the work we want to make, we want it to reach almost any person, like of any age, and anybody around the world in terms of their cultures. So that's the kind of like central theme for all of our work.
And I have a preference for being funny. I would like it to be funny.
Well, that's what's so great about your shows, is that it truly, I mean, you experience the full range of emotions when you watch airplay. I mean, even after just the special video that you sent, someone said, that's a lot to go through in 20 minutes, where I was laughing, I was crying, I felt nostalgia for when I saw it in 2017, hope for the future to see it next year. They're like, that was just a lot to process in such a short amount of time.
Oh, that's great feedback.
No, it was truly wonderful. Thank you both so much for making that video. It was very special. And for those of you watching, just a plug quickly, that right before we hopped on here, Seth and Christina said that this was the only virtual content that they were producing this whole time. So we're very thankful to be the beneficiaries of that generosity. Thank you both so much.
Sure.
Okay, so we're gonna.
What else? We're here to answer any questions people want to ask us.
We're going to backtrack a bit and talk about airplay. So how did you all discover, or was it a kind of a mutual discovery of Daniel Wurtzel and his work?
At Facebook. I don't know. We saw a video.
Yeah, in 2010, we were kind of searching around to try to make a new show. We'd done outdoor shows a lot, and we wanted to do something indoors. And Christina said, hey, I saw this cool video on Facebook. And it was Daniel Wurtzel's video of the 2 fabrics swirling in the air, which we clipped to on that. And she's like, but how are we going to meet with him? And it turns out I went to the same university he went to.
Wow.
But he went 10 years earlier. So I just called him up and said, hey, I went to the same college and we're clowns and we want to work with you. And he said, come down to my studio.
Seth is bold. He just straight out asked this like super famous artist.
it turned out to be a great collaboration. We stayed really good friends with him, and he was great to work with.
I love it. And for that to come out of a cold call, that's amazing.
Well, and I mean, and the kind of longer answer to that is in the tradition of doing street theater, most of the performers we know take what they do outdoors and put them on stage. That's kind of the move of what most artists do. So the jugglers that work outdoors go do juggling inside. The acrobats that work outdoors go do acrobatics. So we thought we would take our water balloon show and put it indoors. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to protect the theater from all this water. And then we would do some of Daniel Wurzel's work and some of our work. But the minute we started working with the materials, we knew the show had to be focused thematically entirely on his kind of métier, his work. And that we had to then put our comedy into the poetry of his work.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of, banging our head against the floor.
We had to sort of like turn our head around to realize what we had stumbled into. Yeah.
So you started this relationship with him in 2010. What was the start of your 100 shows that you felt like this was airplay and this is how we want to present it to the world? How long was that process?
Oh, no. There was 5 years to make the show.
Yeah.
Because Seth and I were still, performing and working to survive while making the show.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time period, we would get arts grants from several different theaters because obviously we need a lot of space. So we got 4 different grants to come and work in their spaces and rehearse. We premiered in 2015.
Right.
And the show, unlike doing outdoor work in the theater, the show has to be pretty good at the top.
That was terrifying because in the street, like no one cares if you're terrible.
Yeah, you can try all sorts of ideas, and if people don't like it, they walk away. But
you're like, okay, that didn't work.
Someone's paid a ticket for you in the theater, so you have to start a little farther down the road.
It's like we had to be good.
So we had a fair amount of showcases in front of audiences as we went. We would smaller showcases, bigger showcases. Mm-hmm. So we had an idea of how audiences respond. But within the 10th show we ever did was a showcase in which agents and theater owners from around the world came to buy shows. So by the 10th time we did airplay, this was in the beginning of 2016, the show had to be good enough that it could work, or we would never get any work, and it was.
No pressure.
It got bad. I mean, it got better since then, but definitely a lot of pressure.
Just thinking back on how I felt before those shows.
Right.
I'm gonna start sweating. So nervous.
So you mentioned in the video that right as Moby starts, you still get nervous. Do you find that has lessened over time, or are you still kind of at the height?
Thank God, yes. Yes, it's gotten better. Practice makes perfect. That is a true juggling skill. So yes. Narrating
that section of the video was so fun because I don't think we've ever talked out loud with each other about what we think about during that piece.
Yeah.
And it was great to hear what she was. We did it a few times, and then we picked the best one. But I'd never really thought about my internal narration of like, oh, is she going to make it? What's going to happen? Oh no, do I have to go say it?
I would say the first 50 times we did that act, I was just like, please, can this show just be over now? Like, can I just?
But sometimes we go into venues in which it's hard to control the air current, no matter how good the theater is and how good the technicians are, just for whatever's going on. And it's really nerve-wracking.
Oh, and then we have 2 sets of fans because there's 2 20 volts and 1 10 volts, and then there's different amperage, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I was an English major, but clearly I should have studied electrician.
I'm sure you all have learned so much in this process that you never anticipated this knowledge taking up space.
Right. But those 2 sets of fans fly differently.
Yeah.
They blow the air differently. The motors are different. The blades are different. So every time we come back from the States and then go overseas and vice versa, like we have to get reacquainted with our fans.
So let me see here in the feed. What are you, maybe other than birds, but is there anything else that you're finding inspiration in right now? Not necessarily related to a new show, but things that you guys are doing right now to still stay connected to your creativity, things that you're watching, reading?
So I'm reading about old things, and Seth is growing new things. I recently got heavily into dinosaurs, which then led me to trees and what trees were growing when during what dinosaurs. So now I just came back from, I'm collecting leaves. The house is full of leaves. And Seth is like, where did this come from?
Since we never get to be home, I like to cook a lot. And since we never get to be home, I've been doing a lot of pickling, fermenting things. We eat a lot of like international food. So we were in southwestern China earlier this year in December in an area called Yunnan province, and they make great pickles there. So I've been learning to make those kind of pickles. So that means like pickling long beans and daikon radish and adding chilies and these Szechuan peppercorns that make your lips numb. And we've been making Korean rice wine at home as well.
The rice wine finishes.
But all that stuff takes time, like you need to let it sit for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And usually we're home not long enough for any of that. So that's been a nice part of being home.
It's been fascinating to actually be home for the first time in 10 years.
For this long. For this long.
And it's supposed to be depressing, but it's kind of nice. So I can't wait to go back and perform, but I'm also thoroughly enjoying being home and setting roots here and discovering my own place.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So how long do you all usually spend when you go to another country to perform? I mean, you make the most out of the routes that you go on, but are you able to take time and enjoy the places that you go and perform in, or is it usually just fun?
Can I tell the long story?
Tell that story.
Okay.
This is in 2007. We went to China
the first time. Our first time in China. We fly 14 hours to get there and then take another flight in China. And then they put us on a bus for another 8 to 12 hours. Then we started performing the very next day, doing 4 shows a day, worked for... It
was an outdoor festival.
Was it 6 days straight or 8 days straight?
7
days straight.
Wow.
The very next morning, they put us back on the same bus, going back 8 to 10 hours and stuck us straight on the plane, and we went back home. And I was like, never again am I going to the other side of the world and not staying. Yeah. So everywhere we go, we give ourselves a week.
So for example, last fall we did a month tour of the Netherlands, and we stayed at the end of that for like 4 or 5 days. And our crew, we have 2 people that travel with us, and they all want to see the world too. So they stayed with us there. And then we went starting in November, we went to China, and we did like a 2-week tour. And then we had like 7 days down there before we went to Singapore. And then we performed in Singapore for a week, and we had like 4 days down in Singapore. And then we had a break. So we said, let's fly to Vietnam because it's short. It's cheap to go there. And then we went to Australia, and between 2 festivals in Australia, they asked us if you want us to put us back to back or give us a week in between. So we took the week in between so we could go. Now, we don't earn as much money doing that, but then we don't lose seeing the world. Right. And half the reason is to do this kind of work is to see the world.
Why else would you? I hear about some tours like dance companies, and they go all over Europe, but just one night in each town.
Yeah.
For me, it's about being there, seeing the birds, eating the food, meeting the people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really loved being at festival actually, because we were there for a couple days.
Yep.
And we got to see the rest of the festival. And I remember climbing up inside there was that museum that has like a mesh netting, and you climb up to the top.
We got to hang out on the river and hear the music that one of the nights we were there. We had a great time.
So we had a great time being in West Virginia. And the other benefit of being in the States and doing airplay is that we get to rediscover our own country. So we get to see corners of the States that it's been a really, I mean, it's like, we travel all the time, but really it's been.
I'm so glad to hear that you all are able to take that time for yourselves and to fully just experience the countries that you get to travel to. Not only is the other way of doing it just, it's got to be mentally and just physically exhausting, but you guys are exactly right. That's part of the beauty of traveling, is really getting to experience all of those things. Is there a cuisine or something that
Yunnan, Korea?
Well, Yunnan.
Vietnam. Oh man, nope. So there's no cuisine. name a country and like a food will come flying out of my mouth, like
Yeah.
saying what it was that I'm remembering.
I mean, of the places and countries we've been, I've definitely spent more time cooking like food from Southeast Asia than I do from Europe.
Yeah.
But that's my preference in terms of food flavors. So, more noodle soups, less German sausages.
He's been making kimchi recently.
I was just about
so
to ask that.
It's so good.
All of the fermented goodness.
All the fermented goodness. Yeah.
Well, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to host you all here in Charleston again, and hopeful that you can carve out some time to enjoy the rest of the festival next summer. So glad that you got to go down and experience the levee and the climbing sculpture at the Clay Center. They still have that. And I'm trying to think, if this was in 2017, I know that they took out a couple of the platforms because they really underestimated the number of adults who would want to climb it.
Really?
And some of the twists and turns were a little too tight for full-grown adults. So they made it a little easier, not too much easier, but you'll have to do it again so you can compare the two.
Twist my arm. Yes, I will definitely be there.
Well, we'll definitely do that. Waiting on a couple more questions to come in, but Christina, can you and Seth, can you guys talk about your backgrounds? Because I know that Seth talked about the school that he went to, but they'd like to hear a little bit more about your background too.
Well, I'm curious if there are any kids watching.
I'll let you know if they type in.
I was a ballet dancer and on the edge of being professional, and got into I don't know how to tell the story. I'm a nerd. I went to Princeton.
But people from Princeton don't like to say they went there. So that's why she's having a hard time saying that.
Because you get judged really quickly when you say you've gone to an Ivy League school. But the fact of the matter is, I worked my tail off. Mm-hmm. I got straight A's, and it's all been worth it. Every hour of homework, every hour in the ballet studio, it's all worth it. It all comes back around. Mm-hmm. And then when you're stuck in the middle of Chile and two of your fans have broken and you can't figure out where the electricity is working or not working, you learned enough about electronics along the way that even though you're supposed to be just a clown and you majored in Shakespeare, you have the capability to be able to solve a lot of different kinds of problems. And then because we run our own business, mm-hmm. We've had to learn a lot of things that you don't expect to learn when you go to college, and you just can't be afraid of hard work. You just dig your head in and go.
Christina always said she got interested in mask performing, what they call style called commedia dell'arte, because she went to the ballet, and even though she'd been trained in ballet, she saw these people falling asleep.
Yeah, that's true.
But for something was being done with masks, and theater was like engaging people. So she said, maybe I need to switch careers or switch paths as a performer, right?
I started studying theater because I couldn't figure out why ballet, which takes your entire life and your entire involvement, would put people to sleep. And then I went and watched a really bad play, and the audience was like, yeah! And I was like, all right, I'm going to go study theater just to figure out what's going on.
And I mean, Christina's lines are still, her movements are still very dance-based. Mm-hmm. And as a clown, she had to kind of learn to make those movements when she wanted to less poetic so that they would be funnier.
I say the first 10 years I was a professional clown, the biggest comment would be like, can you make that fall less graceful? Can you make that fall funny instead of beautiful?
Right. Never mind the fact that you spent, in very disciplined however many years.
Right. I spent all those years making my body perfectly beautiful, and now I'm trying to make it the opposite. Yeah.
But one of the schools she went to, I went to as well. I went 1 year before her. So we actually have 1 year of the same kind of schooling background in terms of doing physical theater, the one out in Blue Lake, California.
Mm-hmm. And then Seth is the most overeducated clown you will ever meet. It's because you went to 3 schools. Yeah,
I went to Ringling Brothers Clown College. They had a clown college to train people to be circus clowns for the Ringling Brothers Circus. Mm-hmm. And then I went to the school that we went to at different time periods. And then the Lecoq School. So I went to a lot of theater schools.
And when he says Lecoq School, it's very fancy 2-year master's program in French pedagogy of
Physical
movement
theater.
and physical theater. So
That's fascinating. Where is that?
he gets all the degrees.
So yeah, I have all the degrees. The degrees don't help. What helps is making good work.
Well, but that's a result of all of the energy and the discipline and the time that you all have invested. I mean, it's certainly Airplay nor any of the shows that you create. Someone could just wake up and decide that they wanted to be a clown and they could do that. I mean, you can see from the show, you can tell just from talking to the two of you, just how much goes into what you do.
Well, and most theater companies work in the state, around the world. You have a director and you have the actors, and you do a play that's been written.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to invent everything, and our training is such that we know how to critically analyze it, but also look at it from the perspective of a director. So we often videotape our own work and then look at it from the outside, so we can think about it that way as well. We don't work in a kind of a conventional theatrical situation.
So we're the director, the playwright, and the performer.
And the truck driver, and the flat tire fixer, and the cargo lifter.
Right.
And, that's
And
how you make it work as a husband and wife touring company.
Well, and you're the business owners too. I mean, you two are it.
we're it, For Airplay, we have two other people that work with us, a technical director and a stage manager, who are like our left and right arms. And they do stuff now. We don't really understand what they do. We have an idea, but it's like, no, you guys handle that, and then we'll show up.
Feels good to just delegate that.
It's awesome.
Not have to worry about it. So, sorry, I'm reading this one.
No problem.
How many times do you perform Airplay in a year? You travel so much. Is there like an average that you try to get X number of shows in per year?
As many as possible.
But that's a really good question.
We've toured. We started, so I can answer that more opaquely. We started touring in 2015, and we finished touring. The last show we did was just back in February, and we've done it 267 times, or 53 times, something like that.
How many theaters? 50 theaters? 70 theaters?
Yeah, and 70 theaters or something.
So you'll also do like residencies, like perform back like multiple nights at the same theater?
Yeah, the reason it's hard to answer is because sometimes they show up at a theater and we perform only once. And then sometimes we show up at a theater and we perform for an entire week. Yeah. So the numbers vary. But when we were in the circus for a year, we ended up doing, September to June, we did 387 shows for the circus.
Wow.
And that's a typical performing schedule for a circus.
Yeah.
Wow. And that's the show where you were talking about, I think it was maybe you said that you were like dragging Christina around, bouncing up and down.
Yeah, we're bouncing her on her butt on, she had a big butt made out of like inflatable playground balls.
That sounds like a lot of work to do 300 sometimes. And
we were in very good shape and like on the edge of being injured every day. And we were doing the easy part of the circus. The circus artists, the good ones, were doing much harder things than we were.
Yeah. So you were talking about college and forward, but because I think we have a couple kids watching us today too, they're wondering what your training was when you were their age. What were you guys doing and studying? Obviously, Christina, you were likely doing ballet, but what sorts of things were you doing when you were younger?
When I was in high school, I really got into juggling. I mean, I was always doing sports. I was doing lacrosse and wrestling and volleyball and running and whatever sports I could play wherever I traveled around a lot as a kid. So I lived in India for 3 years. I lived in Kenya for 3 years. I lived in Sri Lanka for 3 years. And I always did whatever sports I could do when I was in those countries. But in high school, I was back in the States for the last 3 years of high school. And I got really into juggling, which meant like balls, clubs, unicycling,
chainsaws.
And that's what got me into theater. I'd done a couple of like school plays, but I really liked the juggling aspect of things. And so I did like the talent show in 11th and 12th grade. And that's what made me interested in going to Ringling Brothers Clown College, having some kind of skill like that.
So did you win the talent shows?
I don't remember. I don't think I won. I think there were people definitely more talented than me. I was like juggling balls and falling off of a unicycle in 11th grade. That's kind of what I was doing.
And I got started in ballet very, very late, which is probably why I never achieved the level that I wanted as a professional. But I started at 12, and all the time before that, I was soccer and track and field. So.
But from our perspective, like we do a lot of work with circuses, and circus is one of the best things as a young person to get involved with because it takes every kind of kid. We've done a lot of teaching of circus camps. I mean, working in Afghanistan, but even in the States is like, no matter what skill set you have, circus has something for you, which is not the case for like soccer or baseball or ballet or whatever. Circus takes every kind of body.
Yeah,
and,
you need the super big guy who's on the bottom, and you need like the little skinny guy who flies up at the top, and you need the person who's like super nerdy and juggles, and you need the person who's like outgoing and like not aware to be the ringmaster, and you need you need all types.
So we always like to encourage young people, if they're interested in that world at all, it's great because there's always a place for you. And some other places are harder, like other sports are harder in that sense.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I got so enthralled in that answer.
Hey, no problem.
That's all right.
I took my eyes off of this. So we've cycled through the questions. Is there anything that you guys would like to share that we haven't covered with?
Can I ask them a question?
Of course.
Because some of the people watching might have seen the show from 2017. I'm curious what feeling they remember from the show.
Okay.
Or if they remember what the story may have been for them.
Right.
I love this question because around the world, people see different things in the show. So I'm kind of curious what West Virginia thought.
Oh, I can't wait to see what people put in the comments box. I mean, I'll fill in while we wait for those answers to come in. When I was watching your video, I was so thrilled that Moby was the piece that you chose to dig into, because it was this really weird experience of just kind of tunnel vision when that came on, and I immediately forgot that I was sitting in my dining room at home. I was back in the seats at the Clay Center, and I've got chills just like thinking about remembering it again. But just the total awe that washed over me with the motion of the fabric that you saw, and when it comes out over the audience, and when you said that people have mentioned to you seeing like whales and dolphins in the fabric, is just like taking that kind of moment. And I felt, it made me feel like I was underwater, and just how incredible that sensation was. Sitting and then walking outside and being like, oh, that's right, it's in the middle of June and I'm in West Virginia. It was just this total transportation of senses and emotion and everything. It was magical.
That was an interesting, we're waiting to see if anyone writes you. That was an interesting piece to create because Daniel had these big pieces of fabric in his studio and was rigging them. So he's like, you guys should just rig them on strings. And we had put eye hooks in the corners of the piece of fabric, and then he said, we don't want anything, when we started working with airplay, we don't want anything rigged. We want everything to be in our hands because we come from a juggling tradition. So everything should be manipulated without being held down. And we were rehearsing in a space that only had about 20 feet. And then we got a grant to be in a theater, like a proper theater, a 2,000 seat theater. And the minute we put Moby in there and saw it fly 45 feet in the air, we knew we had that act. And then Christina's like, I've got to find these choruses, this music for it. I don't know how she thought we should have like boys choirs for that piece, but finding the right piece of music, which we haven't really talked a lot about for airplay, is endless. I don't know how you find the music for that. Anyway, so that's yeah.
It's a lot of it's just my ballet background. I think musically, I actually have a lot of difficulty speaking on stage, which makes sense from ballet, but my perception of the world comes through sound. And even when I'm bird watching, I learn the bird songs. Sometimes I just that's
and ballet has such a nice, or dance has such a nice tradition of using movement to illustrate music. And that's kind of what we were also thinking about when we were creating airplay, but instead of using dance, we wanted to use balloons and fabrics to help illustrate music, kind of world music.
So how did you source? I think we've got some shy people on here.
Hey,
It's
no,
okay.
no problem.
It's okay.
Or they're typing at length. So
No,
I
no.
hope it's the latter.
No worries.
It's all right.
But how did you source the music? I mean, was that just something that you kind of dug into and you knew the style that you were looking for? So that's or did you know pieces off the top of your head that you wanted?
Sometimes the inspiration comes forwards and sometimes the inspiration comes backwards. But oftentimes I will know what I want a scene to accomplish. And I never pick a piece of music that plays the scene. So a lot of movie music is written so that you feel a certain emotion from the music, and that's what you feel while you're watching. Mm-hmm. And I always try to find contrasting music, or I try to find music that pulls the emotion in a different way. So, for example, the very first opening of the show are the two fabrics flying around. And I was like, this is the first time that we're meeting air, and this is the first time that we're meeting the scale and the size of this. And I said, immediately I wanted wind instruments. If I could get a metal wind instrument, that would be the preference. And I wanted to find unscripted music, or music that was not predicated on a particular beat. I wanted something that flowed and fell in an unpredictable way, the same way that the fabrics were doing it. And so I ended up researching a lot of Balkan music and a lot of gypsy bands that have a tradition of playing their horns, playing their trumpets, improvisationally. Mm-hmm. And then on top of it, there is a certain kind of mourning song, like a crying song or a sad song that's called a doina. And so I fell into the world of doinas and
listened to a lot of doinas.
Didn't come out for a couple days and then reappeared and said, Seth, this is what we want. But I was thinking about it that way. Like, I want something that plays the air, and I want something that play,
Mm-hmm. So you just, I mean, it's an immersion kind of that you experience.
And then in terms of, and it doesn't sound like, I mean, I'm not a genius. I don't pick the right one right away. Like I generally make a list of like 20 to 25 different pieces of music that might work that I experiment with. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you play it in the room with the sculptures going or with whatever we're working on, it's pretty evident pretty quickly.
Yeah. We were, one of the shows that we got canceled this spring was going to be a premiere of Airplay with a live symphony with 60 musicians on stage. And because we use a lot of contemporary music in the show, a symphony couldn't play them. So we needed to find symphonic music that would work. And we could listen to everything we wanted in our apartment or on the road in hotel rooms, but it wasn't until we were in the theater with the space around us that we could play the music and actually hear which of the tracks we thought would work best. So we said, this piece of classical music is gonna be great for well, not for kites, but for a different piece. But then we got in there like, oh, that's not gonna work at all. Yeah. And the conductor was giving us music as well, so we'd go back and forth with him. But we have to really fly the materials inside the space we're going to perform to hear what the right piece of music is.
Oh my
God. So that's for music, and it's the same for comedy.
Yeah.
So for comedy, we have to find out what's happening in the space, because how close you are to a person changes what kind of rhythm you can play inside of comedy and what kind of comedy you can even do.
Yeah.
So it's all, I don't know if anybody else actually makes shows the way we make shows, which is with the physical things in our hands, and then you can't determine what's going to happen until you're in a space that's of a similar size. Mm-hmm. I don't know any other American companies that devise work the way we do. Like we're kind of in a weird. But it means that the shows we make are unique and interesting. So
yeah,
absolutely. So we have someone who's not as shy. She says that she wasn't able to see the show in 2017, but she has watched clips previous to this because she regretted not being able to make it. But after she watched the festival video, she wanted to share how she felt. She said, I felt almost every emotion. It was genuine laughter at so many parts, and then in tears from the sheer beauty of others.
That's our goal.
Yeah.
She summed up what we tried to do.
And what I enjoy about that kind of comment is that, I mean, she was watching the video, but when you make a show without words, the audience has to place their themselves into the show. It's the audience's own imagination has to be actively involved to understand what's happening. And I find that's, for me as an artist, is so much more evocative than it would, no denigration to scripted work, but you're often with scripted work told what to think. The words are coming at you, telling you what, and nonverbal work from the long lineage of mime is this opposite thing of you having to figure out what's going on. So when I hear someone, when that succeeds and someone says they felt that broad range of emotions, that's nice.
Oh, good. Well, I'm sure she's very excited to see the show next summer. I know that we all are. I don't know if our audience is finished asking questions, but I'll wait just a minute more to see if any more comes in. But just wanted to take the time to thank you both again for sharing yourselves so freely with us, and that Festival could be the premiere for the behind the scenes of Airplay, and for you guys taking some additional time out of your discovery and journey through collecting leaves and fermenting things to join us today. We really appreciate it. What's next for you guys? Is there
I have to step back just a little bit and just say thank you for giving us the opportunity, because in the States especially, it's mostly thought of as like this kid's show. And some fans turn on and it should be easy. And no one actually asks us the philosophical questions and the physical questions that happened to us in developing the show. And it was really nice to revisit how much work we put in and have that be acknowledged from a real artistic standpoint, and not just be dismissed as like a kid's project. So thank you for giving us the time to say some of that stuff.
Goodness, it's our extreme pleasure. I mean, in 2017, we thought we knew how much we were going to love the show, but being able to experience it was something else entirely. And I would venture to say that not even a month goes by in the festival office where someone doesn't talk about how great the show is. So, I just can't say how much we appreciate it. It's certainly acknowledging the work and the process and everything that has come to be what is known as Airplay and Acrobufos in general, but just that it's so appreciated what you all have created and what you share with us and with the world with the show. Someone is just wanting to share a nice little comment. I love hearing about Seth and Christina's artist expression. Hearing their passion about their work is so wonderful. And Airplay is such a beautiful expression of their talent and their heart.
Oh, thank you. We can't wait to come back to Festival.
Yes, next
coming tomorrow.
We would love it. We would love it, and I'll tell you all the good places to eat, the local places. Awesome. We'll certainly fill you in on all of that. There's a place that's got a great. Well, you can judge it for yourself. I think it's pretty great. A good kimchi, like bulgogi taco. It's
okay.
Yes.
Totally in.
Wait, is this the place that serves all different kinds of tacos?
Yeah, Black Sheep.
Yes, we were there.
They were good.
Well, good. You've already been there. You don't need me to tell you.
Oh, that was on my list. That was like right there on the top. I was like that.
I actually just had one of those last night, and it's just as delicious as it always has been.
Awesome.
They have a fish taco too. I remember really good too. Okay,
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, we're really looking forward to hosting you again in Charleston next June. Thank you, Seth and Christina. Thank you. Take care. Be well. We're so excited to have you and hope that. Oh, yep. Everyone's saying can't wait for next year.
See you guys next year.
Yes. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.